Democrats are looking for a path forward in the wake of the disastrous 2016 election. Here to discuss that with us now is our good friend, historian Kathleen Frydl, who is the author of several books, including The Drug Wars in America. I got to get the years right. The Drug Wars in America, 1940 to 1973. Those were the days. Anyway, Kathleen, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
And we knew how to have drug wars back in the day, let me tell you.
You know, the dates are anachronistic on that book, so I applaud you for actually looking at it, because most people think that the drug war began in 1973 and was escalated in the 1980s, and so to date it in 1940 is a little bit tricky on my part. So I think it's something that, you know, ordinary people wouldn't guess those are the dates for the drug war, but it turns out that's when prohibition as a philosophy and as a law emerged. So
that's interesting. Those people have clearly never seen Reefer Madness.
Exactly.
Which means where have they been all their life? But we're not here to talk about that. We can if you like to, but we're really here to talk about the Democrats. So first of all, I want to commend you, because you were one of the first people to call the trajectory of this election. I forget when it was exactly, but we talked about this first half of 2016, when you said that Hillary Clinton, and by extension perhaps the rest of the Democrats, were in danger of running kind of a Brexit, so it was whenever the Brexit vote was, in danger of running a Brexit-type campaign. In other words, a status quo campaign where an anti-democratic vote might be perceived as a leave vote. I mean, it's not exactly the way you put it, I'm paraphrasing. But in essence, is that part of what we saw in this election, you think?
I don't think there's any doubt about it. And just like the Brexit vote, there's no doubt in my mind where the merit in the argument lied. I mean, I definitely in the Brexit vote supported Remain, and definitely in November 2016, I voted for Hillary Clinton. The question is not where the merit in the argument lies. The question is whether the establishment has the credibility to make that case. And I think clearly we're at a point where it no longer does.
Well, and I think that has to do, to me, but you know, obviously I want your thoughts. I think that has to do with the disconnect that a lot of people feel. I mean, I think there are two factors here. Everybody talks about Trump voters, okay? And I think that is one, that a lot of Trump voters may not have expected him even to win, but It was a protest vote. Everybody's talked about that at length. But, and I do think that's an important factor, in the fact that the establishment per se, the elites, as they're perceived to be, not without reason, have lost credibility. But then I think you have to look at issues like Democratic voter turnout, base turnout, African-American turnout, and so on. To me, I'm curious your thoughts, to me those two things are two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely. You know, the long-term credibility of the Democratic Party rests not just in overall Democratic turnout, which has gone down. It also rests in the rise of independent voter registration, especially among young people. Independents are the leading voter registration. I sounded that alarm for several years now, because that's been true for quite some time. But the Democrats, who are the establishment Democrats, who are constantly caught up in kind of short-term financial quarterly thinking, never got around to attending to those issues of long-term or intermediate value. And in addition, something that Keith Ellison has drawn attention to in the past, the importance of non-voters, people who feel people who feel totally disengaged and disconnected from the political process. That is also a Democratic problem. And the Democratic Party establishment said, no, we're smarter than you. It's not really a problem. We're going to continue to, you know, conduct kind of short-term, transactional, quarterly thinking. And then all of a sudden, Donald Trump is your president.
Yeah, I love the analogy, the term quarterly thinking, because I think that's exactly right. And I also think that, you know, there's always a point in these conversations, if Democrats are involved, where, and I mean, you know, establishment Democrats, where someone immediately jumps in and says, yeah, but Hillary won, or she almost won, or whatever. Right. But I have two answers to that, and then I want to see how much you feel these connect together. One is, first of all, I don't think it should have been close. I think given the extraordinarily high negatives of Donald Trump, this should have been a blowout, number one. And number two, James Comey did it or the Russians did it or whatever, does not explain all the down ballot losses, the loss of two-thirds of
Absolutely.
state houses, the loss of two-thirds of governor's seats. Well, obviously, gerrymandering has a lot to do with Congress and a certain amount to the state houses, but Republicans had to get in to do the gerrymandering. So to me, it's a Democratic-wide problem. It shouldn't have been close. Does it all tie in with the sort of what you call quarterly thinking?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. And actually, just to reframe a little bit, the second of your points, there's no tremor at the top of the ticket that should have that kind of seismic effect. And likewise, there's no piece of personal information or news about a Democratic Party candidate, as long as it's like within the realm of, legitimate politics. There's no piece of troubling news that should discredit that Democratic Party candidate. We should have been making a larger argument for power that was separate and distinct from the persona of Hillary Clinton herself. So there's all kinds of ways in which I agree with you. I mean, I wrote an autopsy report just premised on this very thinking. And actually, it's alarming for me when I hear that sort of excuse making. And it shouldn't be, because you and I both know that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. And,
Right.
There's all kinds of things that we agree with, components of those kinds of interventions that we agree with. But what they sound like to me, and maybe to you too, is a refusal to take responsibility and hold ourselves accountable to this failure in a way that will help us engineer future success.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I think of someone like Paul Krugman, who fought vigorously for the Hillary Clinton message, and then tweeted recently, well, when you talk about losing, you don't get to exclude, I'm pretty sure it was Krugman, you don't get to exclude California just because it buttresses your argument. And you say, well, actually, you do get to exclude California because that's how the Electoral College works.
Right.
And those were the rules we knew going in. So
Right.
if you have a message that only carries the coast,
Right.
you're not going to win.
Yeah, that argument seems self-discrediting in my eyes, because the Electoral College was not a last-minute surprise that was sprung
Right.
on us. And the asymmetry in vote totals, which I agree with you, the popular vote should be even more dramatic. The difference should be even more dramatic than what it actually was. But even the difference, which is dramatic enough, is itself, in my eyes, a story of failure, because it suggests that the votes were there. They just had a campaign, a message, and a candidate that failed to kind of allocate their resources appropriately and attend to the Democratic base itself. I mean, to me, that argument is almost self-discrediting on its face.
Well, it also suggests to me, and I'd be curious in your thoughts about that, and again, we're talking with historian Kathleen Frydl, it also suggests to me that the messaging of the campaign was directed to people who were already pre-decided to be Hillary voters. In other words, that there was a circularity, almost this air of self-satisfaction about it. That we know Trump is bad, we know Trump is a sexist, we feel superior to people who would consider voting for him, so let's not even direct our messaging to non-voters, let's direct it to people who think like we do.
And I personally found that kind of insularity to be, and we were talking right after the election, and I think I said this, I found that kind of insularity, the kind of Lena Dunham and Amy Schumer,
right.
parading them out constantly, when in fact, you have that audience, you've won that audience. You don't need to constantly parade those people, that thinking, that politics out there. I found that to be indicative of a campaign-wide refusal to make affirmative commitments to the progressive left. In other words, they were so satisfied with, the cards that they had, that there was no willingness to transact or talk with other parts of the Democratic Party coalition.
Yeah, or potential parts of the coalition.
Right.
So we're agreed on that. Now we have a Democratic Party that is actively, it says, seeking a way forward. And on that, I have called up here the conference agenda. David Brock, who I've addressed on this program a couple of times. David Brock was the founder of Media Matters and American Bridge, and took a lot of super PAC money, according to some thinkers and some interpreters of the law, attorneys, I believe they're called, illegally coordinated with the Clinton campaign as a super PAC. on messaging and quite vigorously attacked Bernie Sanders and his supporters online, and according to his own post, spent $1 million to encourage others to do so. He has since apologized on Medium.com to Bernie, but he is hosting this conference that took place or is taking place this weekend, and it's to try to find a way forward for Democrats. First of all, have you seen this agenda?
I have.
Okay. Reactions, thoughts?
You know, I said this yesterday. Components of this agenda were very striking to me because they are essentially breakout sessions on things that I was writing 6 or 7 months ago. So things about, actually we should start to think and look very closely as to whether this is fascism. There's a breakout session on that. And I'm very happy to see Masha Guess in there because she herself, I think, has a very powerful voice on this issue. There's also breakout sessions on corporate media. I didn't notice any particular speaker well-credentialed to speak on corporate concentrations of power, which is a huge problem in media, but nevertheless, the conference will address the problem of corporate media and messaging and so on and so forth. But the one thing that I've been writing about since this election season was in full swing that's not on the conference agenda at all has to do with the establishment and the establishment holding itself accountable. That's
Right.
nowhere on this agenda. Surprise, surprise.
Well, that's what struck me too, was the lack of accountability. And some of these same people are now working with the DNC on how to bring in the Bernie voters and kind of capture that message.
Right.
And specifically the Bernie Sanders message. Well, I was his only writer.
Right.
I didn't get a call, and nobody else from the campaign.
Right.
So if you want that energy,
Right.
So it strikes me more. I'm a little harsher than you, I guess I would say, in that it strikes me more as a full employment program for unsuccessful consultants. There are some good people here, but for example, breakout session, learning from 2016, democratic messages that win. That would be what exactly? That's one of my concerns. And who's on that panel? Harold Ford Jr.?
Yeah.
Who is a very right-leaning corporate Democrat and very cozy with Wall Street and hedge funds and so on. This is where you turn for messages that can win. I'm sorry, I'm just a skeptic.
Yeah, that particular component was brought to my attention by Marcy Wheeler, who's a national security blogger and incredibly brilliant person. And
We had her on the show last week.
well, there you go.
We only have brilliant people on the show.
And the first thing that caught her attention was Harold Ford, and she sent it to me like, people still listen to Harold Ford. So, I mean, obviously that they're, and I read David Brock's apology to Bernie with a sort of skepticism that you have regarding this agenda, because I felt that apology was very superficial in nature. And I really feel, what I was thinking about on the way here, Richard, and I'm curious to know what you think about it. Do you remember that book by Matt Bai called The Argument? Do you remember this book? So he's a New York Times political reporter.
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely.
And I read this book, and it was ostensibly about Democratic Party ideological differences and factionalism and whatever. And what's interesting about it is that the book, The Argument, actually contains no features of the argument. In other words, the tension and contest, if you will, and conflict between those who accept neoliberalism and those who reject it. And so by neoliberalism, I mean a politics of austerity, deregulation, and unrestrained free trade.
And privatization of government functions,
which
that
is
sort of thing.
Completely a part of austerity, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So those tenets which were accepted and ascendant and made part of the Democratic Party via Bill and Hillary Clinton in the 1990s versus the reaction against that acceptance, right? So I was thinking about that book on the way here because what's interesting is there's no, discussion of what the actual argument is. It's all portrayed in terms of new media and new ways of organizing via grassroots that Obama capitalized and Bernie capitalized on as well. But there's no real argument to the argument. So instead of calling it the argument, I was thinking that book should be called The Pause, or like the interregnum. You know what I mean? Like we haven't resolved this. And so when people call for an end to factionalism, what I hear, and I want establishment people to know this, what I hear is a silencing, right? Because we have yet to have this conversation. in an honest way within the Democratic Party. And for David Brock to call for an end to factionalism when the party establishment is completely enthralled to a politics of neoliberalism sounds like he doesn't want to have the argument.
Well, of course not. And I would say that, first of all, I completely agree. Secondly, that, people are out there saying, let's stop rehashing the 2016 election. I think there's no
Right.
more important task in front of
Right.
us now than rehashing the 2016
Agreed.
election. And third, I think a lot of people, who was it, Disraeli, who said you cannot change a person's mind, well, he said a man's mind, if their livelihood depends on it not changing, or where it's that effect. So I think there's all of the above going on.
Right.
But I will say, we're going to run out of time, but I will say that I think what's going on right now is a battle for the future of the Democratic Party.
No question.
And a battle for the future of the American political debate. And I don't think it's going to be won by buying Bernie's email list, because Bernie's email list will lose its value the first time you send out an email supporting Cory Booker for president. Its value will drop to zero. It's not fungible. It is the reflection of a movement, and there's nothing in here about building a movement.
Exactly. And that's in a sense what I'm saying, that Matt Bai's treatment of the argument is, in a sense, let's buy Bernie's email list from him, right? When in fact, the argument that we need to have is still very much on the table. And we're now approaching a DNC chair election,
Right.
which I like to refer to as a Class A shareholder meeting, right?
Right. It's exactly what it is.
You know what I'm saying?
And
because only certain members have voting powers. But the Class A shareholders in this case are responsible for catastrophic failure and have been guilty of the same kind of quarterly financial transactional thinking that has brought us to ruin. So
where we're going to have to leave it then is to say, I couldn't agree with you more, and we have to figure out how to conduct a shareholder revolt. Right?
Exactly. And how to get the people voting, the Class A shareholders, to understand that they have, first of all, brought the company into ruin and need to look to the Class B shareholders, let alone the consumers buying the product.
Right. Otherwise, they'll have no asset. So we'll have to leave it there, but historian Kathleen Frydl, as always, a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming on.